Three, two, one. Before we get started, I would like to preface this episode that this is going to be a little bit different topical conversation, as I'm going to be discussing the topics of anxiety, depression, and fear. I'm going to be sharing my story, and this might get a little heavy for some of you. In the hopes of sharing my story and continuing this conversation and dialogue, I definitely hope you take this to heart. This is going to be the most vulnerable I have ever been. Not only with this episode and with this podcast in general, but maybe sharing a story with you that a lot of my family doesn't even know, and a lot of my friends don't even know or are aware of. And now, after doing this episode, I can say that the world is now going to know. This is the Wise Guy Radio Show, a podcast dedicated to educating and inspiring through conversations with today's top talents in the world of glass. We will be dissecting their journeys in hopes to deliver actionable content that you, the artist, can start implementing now, helping you grow not only as a creative spirit, but also a successful artistic entrepreneur. With a little organization, relationship building, and your artistic ability, you can obtain greatness. Climb aboard, whether an artist, retail owner, or enthusiast. We have a ton of fun in store for you. Welcome to the Wise Guy Radio Show. You're listening to the Wise Guy Radio Show. This episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show is brought to you by American Helix. The American Helix is a revolutionary new concept in smoking technology. Designed and manufactured by American glassblowers, this pipe is light years ahead of its time. Based on Bernoulli's principle, the shape of the pipe, along with an innovative intake system, creates a Venturi effect through precision micro-holes in the chamber, which results in a slower burn that conserves tobacco and gives a smooth, refreshing smoking experience, making the American Helix the smoothest hitting pipe on the market. For further info or to locate their products, you can find them online at AmericanHelix.com. That's AmericanHelix.com. This episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show is brought to you by Zen Glass Studios. Located in the heart of St. Petersburg, Florida, Zen Glass has a wide range of offerings to choose from. Their menu includes one-on-one or group classes in their hot shop or flameworking studio, create your own wine glass, and so much more. If you're a traveling artist, they even have a space to rent that you can temporarily call home. With over 50 years of combined experience, Zen Glass can help you fine-tune your techniques, whether you're a novice or advanced glass artist. For their calendar of events, including info about their Third Thursday studio jams, you can contact Zen at zenglass.com. That's zenglass.com. This is going to be the most vulnerable episode I've published yet. The discussion of mental health is an all too familiar topic in the art world and glass community. Substance abuse, anxiety, depression, and guilt are just a few of the experiences I have had to deal with personally for most of my life. Just this past year, I made the conscious decision to no longer let this steer my life. As we all know, fight or flight is a real reaction, and typically my responses have come from panic and fear. The immediate reaction to a stimulus, whether an argument, a phone call from a creditor, or a broken relationship, has caused me to make irrational decisions in my life. I've had a long-term affair that lasted over 2 years. I've lied, cheated family and friends to cover up an immense amount of guilt I was experiencing in many areas of my life that all stemmed from irrational decisions and actions taken based on those decisions. To give you some clear context of where this stems from, let me back up a little bit and give you some background on my life. I am a child of divorced parents who separated when I was 3. This event made a lasting impact on my life, and I didn't actually realize how much it affected me until after my divorce from my first marriage. Something that subconsciously affected all relationships I was in, whether business or personal. Only a handful of truly close friends were able to see past my facade, occasionally calling me out, which generally led me to putting up walls that I thought kept them away from seeing my pain or lies. But in reality, they saw right through the barriers too. When my dad left, I immediately became the man of the house, instead of just being a kid. I became the knight in shining armor, ready to slay any dragon that tried to destroy what was left of our kingdom. I felt betrayed, lonely, defeated, and abandoned. There were many weekends when my dad was supposed to come pick myself up and my sister, And as I would sit out in the front stoop of my house, waiting for him to pick us up, my excitement to see him would eventually turn into disappointment, which then turned into abandonment issues, panic attacks, and major anxiety, something a kid should never have to deal with. On a side note, I will say my dad is an amazing man, as him and I have an incredible relationship, and he is truly one of my best friends. I was always patient with my dad, and never blamed him for my issues, as I really didn't think I had issues. My mom, on the other hand, did have her own personal issues, like panic attacks and severe depression, that she never really dealt with. Growing up with my mom, I saw her struggles, occasionally having a panic attack in public, or even, for one instance I remember, her having one while we were sitting at a red light. Memories I will never forget. Growing up around this caused me to look at life with a different perspective, truly trying to find the beauty in it. Even though both of my parents had their own demons, they were both loving and caring and made sure my sister and I grew up to become better adults than they were. It took therapy, a positive attitude, and a lot of faith to get us through the occasional madness as kids. Both sets of my grandparents were very instrumental into making sure that my sister and I went on trips and didn't get stuck in the poverty hole that I lived in for most of my youth. They taught us what having a good work ethic was all about and how to be independent. We were both very compassionate, kind kids, which still carries with us today. These are traits I try to exemplify for my kids and set the best examples for them. I'm not a perfect dad, but I do make sure to tell and show my kids how much they are loved and that when they can talk to us about anything, literally anything. But they too have seen my struggles. My daughter especially, who is now in her last year of high school, getting ready to take the big leap towards college, and finding her own way in life. She has been my rock for the last 17 years and has been on this glass journey with me the entire time. My hopes are that she has learned what not to do, as I had hoped to learn the same from my parents. But unfortunately, those lessons sometimes have to be learned by our own mistakes firsthand, not just from watching others make them from a distance. Let's go back to 1999, to where I began my glass journey, as this will help me guide you to where I am today. I'm not going to talk about every juicy detail, but I do want to talk about overcoming and getting through the crippling emotional state of anxiety, guilt, and depression. Early on in my glass career, I realized that being a professional artist was truly what I wanted to do for a career, and was going to do whatever it took to make that dream a reality. For the first year of learning my craft, I still worked at Subway, which I had been working at for the last 7 years. I learned everything from management, inventory, production, and dealing with customers, skills that turned out to be quite valuable. Having been an artist most of my life, I knew deep down that this was something I really wanted to pursue as a career. As soon as I made my first buck, selling a glass item that was painstakingly made, I was hooked, and knew that the pursuit to becoming a self-relying business owner and artist was right within a hand's reach. I just never completely reached out for it, always holding myself back just far enough to where I would get a taste of it, and then would completely sabotage any forward momentum that was created. Unbeknownst at the time, it was due to anxiety, fear, and guilt. The feelings that I allowed to hold me down and run my life unintentionally. These emotions kept me from becoming successful and consistent. I had the fear of failure and the fear of success. And instead of paying attention to these feelings, I ignored them. All I wanted to do was blow glass and play with my daughter. Yeah, that all sounds great, and it was for a bit, until it came time to pay bills, buy food, and keep enough glass in stock to allow me to continue making orders. Instead, it became the old cliche of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I did everything I could to make a quick buck. Instead of living paycheck to paycheck, it was from one hustle to the next, one pipe sale to the next. I can honestly say that I've made enough money over the last 2 decades of glassblowing to have been able to support my family, or at least help supplement income in order to make ends meet. There were many nights I wouldn't be able to sleep, laying there worried about the bank foreclosing on the house, or hearing a tow truck quietly pull into our driveway and repoing our Jeep, which ended up happening twice. Yeah, twice. And actually, it happened to me personally 3 times in my life. Pretty fucking stupid, right? You'd think I would have learned how to manage my money the first time around, but the guilt and anxiety and fear kept me from telling anybody about these issues, so they were never resolved. Money management was never taught to me, and even as an adult now, it's still a struggle. The only difference is now I'm more open about that specific struggle and have my current wife helping me in the areas that I struggle in. But back then, anxiety had me completely stuck on my head, and instead of asking for help from those who I knew I could talk to, I just pretended that everything was great and tried to be the knight in shining armor again. Eventually, during my first marriage, the shit would hit the fan, the truth would be unveiled, and the lesson of the moment would be learned and then forgotten as anxiety, fear, and guilt would rear its ugly head, and then the irrational decisions would begin to take hold of my life, like the cycles of the seasons. Eventually, as an adult, I was diagnosed with ADD. My counselor helped me learn certain tools to help deal with the mental roadblocks that seemed to always be in my way. Tools like keeping a journal, keeping track of my money daily, reading some self-help books, and getting adequate exercise. This is something that I wish my parents would have recognized early in my life and got me the treatment and help instead of finding it out as an adult and dealing with the consequences of my actions that ended up burning bridges, tarnishing my reputation, and cost me dearly financially. Overall, by my mid-20s, I was close to $20,000 in debt and on the verge of leaving my then fiancé for the third time, all because I felt I was living a lie, was worthless, and didn't deserve anything that I had, whether I had earned it or not. The only thing that I felt was going good for me at the time was that I was a loving father to my beautiful daughter. Now, to back up to the beginning of my glass journey, it all began from a conversation I had with the glass artist at the local Renaissance Festival. This conversation turned into him asking me if I'd like to learn the art of lampwork. At the time, my then girlfriend, who eventually became my first wife, was 9 months pregnant with our daughter. I was young, immature, and full of ego at the young age of 23. Thinking I could take on the world, all the while having a new baby, became a rude awakening. This is when the anxiety, guilt, and depression really began to take hold of my life, and the fight or flight reactions became more and more reactionary instead of rationally thought out and dealt with. At the time, I had never talked to anyone about these emotions or felt the need to, since I was a man and could handle it myself, the knight in shining armor. I was still working at Subway, learning a new craft, had just brought our newborn home, and plus I knew I was in an unhealthy relationship. Instead of giving up, I decided to stick it out. Having grown up with a single mom, I wasn't about to have my daughter grow up in the same environment. This is where the guilt began to run my life. This is where I became a people pleaser and stopped talking about how I truly felt in any scenario. This is where I began to fabricate emotions towards the relationship I was in or developing and made every excuse for myself as to why I was in the situation. The fear of hurting anyone with honesty led to an on and off again relationship with my then girlfriend, whom I had my daughter with. We would get into an argument over something stupid, and instead of dealing with that current issue, I would run from it. This is where I became selfish and only looked out for myself. Even though I had never intentionally hurt anyone, I was hurting everyone around me by not being honest. I dragged out relationships that should have ended. This then led to my girlfriend and I being engaged 3 different times over a 12-year period, with the third engagement finally leading to us getting married, which ended after 4 years. If only I was honest with her about how I truly felt, who knows if we would have actually gotten married. That being said, if we didn't ever get married, I probably wouldn't have my son, whom I love and adore. He is my daily check myself meter to make sure I'm setting an example on being a man of integrity. It wasn't really a true bond of 2 souls that loved each other. It was a roommate relationship and friendship that had zero chance of being anything more than what it was. This ultimately led me down the road to having an affair after being married for only 2 years, and the affair lasted for more than 2 years, both ending the same way, in complete chaos. The affair began from an innocent conversation with the eventual mistress, as they usually do. She was cute, had an attraction for glass, and was also a single mom. Insert knight in shining armor syndrome. From an innocent conversation to a complete lack of integrity, I pursued the affair. The affair filled holes in my heart that my marriage didn't. This should have been talked about in an honest manner with my then wife through counseling, but as usual, I was afraid to talk to her about these things and my ego was too big and in the way. So the thought of discussing it wasn't possible. My marriage being tainted from day one seemed like it was set for failure, as the affair became a mixed bag of fear, lust, guilt, and anxiety, all rolled up into this hole of darkness that eventually manifested itself into a suicide attempt. It's a day I will never forget for the rest of my life. For starters, let me paint a picture for you. It was opening day of baseball for the Tampa Bay Rays, and I was home cleaning the house and preparing to have family and friends over to cook out, drink some beers, and watch the game. Oh, while doing my domestic chores, the doorbell rang, and it was her, the other woman at my house. Instead of telling her to leave, I let her in. This is where it all went wrong. Imagine being backed into a wall by a burden that you manifested yourself, culminating from a lifetime of poor decisions that manifested into a moment in time where I truly felt that the only way to not only stop making these poor choices, but to also escape the fear that had me trapped in my own skin, turned into my attempting to end my life. Realizing how much of a fool I was for letting her in, I immediately asked her to leave. I realized that even though we were having an affair, bringing her into the sacred space of my family's home was a mistake, so I asked her to leave, and she refused. After a long-winded screaming match, it then manifested into me saying, "Fuck it. If you're not going to leave, then I will." At the time, we were in the middle of adding an addition to the back of the house, so I ran out into the new addition, threw an extension cord over the exposed rafters in the ceiling, climbed the closest ladder after wrapping the cord around my neck, and jumped off, right in front of her. In that split second, I saw my kids and my life flash before me, and questions began to rise from the depths of my soul. The biggest question I heard was, "What the fuck are you doing?" During those few seconds, the momentum of the jump was cut short as I felt physically thrown back on the ladder, as if the hand of God grabbed me and pushed me back to the ladder before I could fall any further. This day was supposed to end with celebrating the fact that it was opening day for the baseball, but instead turned into the day I almost ended my life. After consoling the other girl, consoled her, which really doesn't say much for her as a person, but she eventually left and I went back to cleaning and the party still happened. Friends and family still came over, and because of my ability at the time to act like nothing was wrong, I hid the burn marks on my neck and throat from the extension cord with the sweatshirt. Yeah, pretty fucked up, huh? Needless to say, the long-term emotional impact that the affair had on me and the other girl involved, as well as my now ex-wife and my kids, all stemmed from my inability to be honest with how I felt and irrationally acting when panic or fear crept in. Eventually, I confessed to my wife, at the time, as well as my parents and sister, about the suicide attempt. It was a wake-up call and led to the end of the affair and my marriage. To put this in context, this all happened about 8 years ago. I immediately moved out, got my own place, began to go to therapy, and started to discover things about myself or events that happened in my life in my childhood that were still affecting me to that moment. The affair was described by my therapist as an addiction and a filler for areas of my marriage that were non-existent or just not discussed. Again, due to my fear and anxiety caused from the guilt I was feeling. I was also extremely codependent. My true healing began once I left the marriage and the affair. Getting out of both relationships and moving on my own was the beginning of truly healing wounds that were still present into my adulthood. My parents' divorce being one of them. I remember literally crying on and off for 2 weeks through this process. Without the support of friends and family, and turning back towards my faith, which I had turned my back against for most of my adulthood, it kept me on track and opened my heart back up to the more receptive, loving man I knew I could become. It took almost 5 years to feel like I was ready to revisit a real relationship and make myself vulnerable like that. During the healing time, however, I did have a few relationships, but it was clearly not the time to be in any kind of relationship until I had healed. Fast forward to 5 years after my marriage, after the affair ended, old doors began to reopen while new ones presented themselves as better options. At this point, I wanted to walk through all of them. But during this time in my life, I had also begun reading self-help books and sought the counsel of a mentor, which was a major catalyst into the beginning of making the right choices in life. That's not to say I make the right choice every time. It's just to say that the decisions I make now are no longer made from fear or panic in order to make myself look better or hide a mistake I made. Instead, I'm learning, even to this day, that I'm not perfect, that I will continue to make mistakes, and the importance of being aware of the anxiety and guilt and depression when they rear their ugly heads instead of reacting to them is the first step. I now experience the emotion and then make a decision based on the results or consequences from that decision. This may take a few minutes or this may now take a few minutes or even just a few this may take a few minutes or even a few days to resolve. But to stop and experience the emotion, to be an actual human being and not just an overreactive human doing, has made the world a difference in the results I get, as well as the healthy nature of the relationships I have today. I am now remarried to an amazing woman who in her own right and manner deals with anxiety. But together we help each other when these emotions come to the surface. I find myself at times going back to old habits and covering up something I think she wouldn't be happy about, and when I do, she calls me out. Generally, these types of situations, like in any relationship, can be resolved by honest dialogue, which generally turns out that you were just overthinking something that turned out to be much less of an issue than it was initially perceived. This has taught me to just be open about my thoughts and feelings and to not be afraid to hurt someone as long as I'm not being malicious. It's when we are closed up and not honest that we hurt those closest to us as well as ourselves. We need to be able to admit and accept our mistakes. It's easier said than done, trust me, I know. To not be afraid and not allow the guilt and anxiety to run our lives is a constant struggle. If we can allow ourselves to just be aware of our emotions, understand that 90% of the time it's just a weird chemical reaction or imbalance in our brains, and not to react right away, and to begin the process of becoming self-aware and mindful. Become more present in your daily conversations, and stop letting fear of the unknown hold you back from who and what you truly are capable of. Be open, be vulnerable. This was not easy for me to record, much less write and revisit these experiences. But in order for me to continue on my path to feeling free from the chains of anxiety, guilt, and fear, I felt it had to be done. I truly feel that without the experiences I had, I wouldn't be the man I am today. It's an honor to produce this show for you on a weekly basis and have a platform to have these types of conversation. If only one listener is helped from this, then it's worth being this vulnerable. This discussion also doesn't end here. This will become an ongoing topic throughout the years as we all either know someone who has been dealing with these types of issues or you're going through them yourself. Don't be afraid to share your story with others. You never know who you will help by opening up. In upcoming episodes, we'll be discussing how to get through these types of emotions with diet and exercise, specific books or podcasts you can listen to for advice or tools to carry with you to deal with these topics. I am always here if you need to reach out. Please do. If you're ever feeling suicidal in any fashion, call a friend for help. There is also the suicide hotline that is available 24/7, and if you are ever in the need or worst case, just call 911. You are special in many ways, and the world will be at a loss without you here. I love you, and thank you again for listening to today's episode. It's a heavy one, and just the beginning of this discussion. This episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show is brought to you by The Flow magazine. Since its inception, the focus of The Flow has been to provide a bond among members of the lampworking community. In every issue, you can enjoy great content with the hottest artists and cutting-edge techniques using the latest industry products. These features, along with the continuation of our Women in Glass edition, Glasscraft Emerging Artist Awards, inspiring gallery showcases, dynamic general interest articles, as well as health and safety information, make The Flow the leading international lampworking journal. For more information or to subscribe to The Flow, go to theflowmagazine.com. That's theflowmagazine.com.